Borag Thung, Earthlets, Earthlings, Squats, Thargo, and extraterrestrials of all hues. Welcome to the 2000 AD Thrillcast. I am your host, Mulcher. And on this episode, we're talking to an artist who, what a remarkable career. Liam Sharp, who many of you will know from his work on American comics, but who began his career by and large at 2000 AD, working on Judge Dredd, co-creator of PJ Maybe, along with John Wagner and Alan Grant. If you don't know who PJ Maybe is, I recommend you go onto the 2000 AD app and find the collections of his stories. And basically, a teenage serial killer. Fantastic stuff. But Liam's career has developed far beyond the pages of 2000 AD. And so it was wonderful to be able to sit down and talk with him about those early days, his apprenticeship with Don Lawrence, the artist on Trigan Empire, and going on to a career in American comics via the million-selling Death's Head 2 series that kind of came out Marvel UK in the 1990s. And he's somebody whose work has evolved, but like so many 2000 AD artists, is still very recognizably his. So it's fantastic to be able to chat away about his life and career. Thank you for everyone who has come back to the 2000 AD Thrillcast after our enforced hiatus. I hope you're enjoying the new episodes. If this is your first time with the podcast, please do go back and enjoy some of our, over 200 episodes of artists, writers, editorial, celebrity guests, all talking about the galaxy's greatest comic. In our next episode in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be talking about Scream, the very short-lived horror anthology comic from the 1980s, which has nonetheless had a disproportionately huge influence beyond its pages. So we're going to be talking to Ian Rimmer, who was editor, Simon Furman, who was both editorial assistant and also one of the writers, and Darren Scott, the editor of SFX magazine. There's a very personal connection to that particular title, all because we're bringing out this now. Again, not necessarily something that's ideal for a podcast, but if you're watching on YouTube, perfect. It's the 40 years of Scream. So this is a beautiful hardcover edition, which reprints all the stories in their original order. So, like I said, 15 issues of it. You've got the 13th Floor, you've got the Dracula File, Terror of the Cats, just absolutely wonderful, wonderful work. And this collection is gorgeous. The slipcase edition is now completely sold out from the Treasury of British Comics web shop. But definitely pick up the standard edition because it's absolutely gorgeous. Some amazing comics in there. So we're going to be talking about 40 years of Scream with those esteemed guests in 2 weeks' time on the Thrillcast. So we're going to plunge right in to our chat with Liam Sharp. As always, thank you very much for tuning into the 2000 AD Thrillcast, and we will see you next time, Earthlets. And as always, splendid Earthrig. It has been like I was looking up the last time I interviewed you, and I think it was for the magazine.
I think it was
in 2010.
So funnily enough, I dragged that out because when we moved back, we had everything in storage. So all our stuff was being shipped out. Thankfully, we had like books and comics and clothes and all the things we needed in storage, but it's been in there for 12 years. Jeez. So everything that we came back to was 12 years old, which was weird all by itself. And we then had to wait 7 months for the shipment to arrive here. But going through all the comics, and that one came up. I had a couple of extra copies of it. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. So strangely, I've just seen that recently.
Oh, amazing, amazing. Well, the reason I bring it up is because there's been a significant amount of water that has passed under that particular bridge since that. I mean, you've been and come back from to the to and from the USA. I mean, was it like kind of slipping into an old pair of shoes, or is there a bit of kind of cognitive dissonance of being back?
Well, I mean, it's all sorts of things.
Mm.
Um, it it took about, and you know, people always said it takes you about 3 years to get used to moving to another country.
Mm.
I think that 3 years is about bang on. Um, but you think when you come back that you will just slip into it like it's an old pair of slippers, and sort of you do, but also there is an adjustment because we were there 12 years. It's a
Yeah.
long time. Um, so it's been lovely. But we sort of hit the road at different speeds, I think. So myself and my wife, Chris, she hit it at one speed and I hit it at another. I was straight down the pub, and a bit too much, and with a bit too much gusto, because that is definitely something very very different over here to there, and it is something I missed.
Mm.
Um, but we came back to the same house. One of the best things that happened is we never sold our house here, and that's just pure chance. That was just how it turned out. We rented it, and then Chris's mum lived here for 3 years, and then she's just bought a place around the corner. These are all things that gave us a reason to come back. Really, it's your parents. They are getting older, and you sort of realizing that the time ahead is not as long as you formerly had, um, and Chris's mum, because she lost her dad, so she moved here into Derby, which was something we never expected because they were in Ireland. So she's just around the corner. Sister's here, my brother's here, and we're all very tight family. And that's been lovely, having everybody here. It's like a first time that we've all ended up in this sort of literally streets apart.
Mm.
Um, Something you couldn't plan for, something that's been, really, really nice. And we were needed, really. Everyone was missing us, so it was time to come home. But also, California got bloody expensive, just ridiculously expensive. And two of the kids came back to England.
Right.
Youngest came back when he was 18. He was determined not to go to college. He's ended up at Sheffield Uni. And I think as soon as he discovered pub life at 18, he was like, why would I go back to California and wait another 3 years? You know, so he's having the time of his life. And he's just gone off to Sheffield now. So they've both been back with us for Christmas. We've got one still in Tucson in Arizona.
Right.
He's the only one. The rest of us are home. He's fine. He's great. But yeah, it's been interesting.
So we'll kind of go roughly chronologically through
Yeah.
your career, but if what why did you take the decision to go over to the States? Was it a work thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the industry that we're in is, although obviously 2000 AD is UK based,
Mm.
a big part of it, a big part of the work that I grew up with was from America. Big part of the work that has inspired me was produced in America. When I did Death's Head, which was the first thing I sort of did after a few years run at 2000 AD, that thing took off in America. It was really made for that American marketplace, and that just opened doors I didn't really expect. And then, of course, we both have friends that moved to America, and they always quite heavily sold it. And it was always good going to New York or wherever and seeing Garth or all the other people who've given it a shot out there. And I think ever since I was a kid, really, it always seemed like that had to be a place to try. It seemed like a world of dreams and a world of opportunity. And you think of people like Barry Smith, even, it seemed like this, that if he hadn't gone to America, maybe he never would have become Barry Smith. And there's an element, even now, I sort of think I might not have had the opportunity to do Wonder Woman, which really sort of relaunched my career, sort of kicked it up a notch, if I hadn't gone and done it. But some obviously so there was that side which was the dream of it, the excitement of it, the promise of it. I came out of school, went straight into work at 18, so I never sort of did the year out or any traveling. The only traveling I've really ever done is just convention stuff,
Yeah.
being invited out. So I felt like I think we both did. We sort of felt that we had an adventure in us. We left it a little late in life, going in our mid 40s, early 40s. But it was an adventure, and it was amazing. And it was founding Madefire as well, which was a digital storytelling company. Doesn't exist anymore, but that was the fact that that got funded and that opportunity came and it was real.
Mm.
Was amazing, and that was really the answer. It's like this is a dream I've always had. Here's something which is basically giving me permission to do it, and so we did. We packed up and we went, and it was interesting. Interesting. Amazing, stressful,
Yeah.
hard, bloody work, eye-opening, and what an adventure.
I mean, if you've kind of come full circle to a degree that you're back in your home, you're back in Derby, back in the UK, because you're one of the interesting things about doing these interviews over the years is seeing the different trajectories that people go on to get where they were. No two journeys are exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I do find yours fascinating because you forgive me if I'm paraphrasing or misrepresenting here, but when we've talked about your childhood in the past, the word that I think you've used quite a bit was there were a lot of hippies around,
Um,
like
Tons.
long-haired artistic types.
What in America
No, no,
or?
no. In your childhood when you were when you were younger.
Oh, yeah. Well, I say hippies. They were. I mean, they were sort of they were old rockers, really. um, there was my uncle Ian was definitely he. I think in terms of comics, and
Hmm.
again, I'm not sure 100%, but this is my memory of it. He was in the Navy, and then he went into the Civil Navy. At which point he grew his hair out, and
Hmm.
you could have hair and beards and whatever, and he would come and stay when he was on leave and bring like Jimi Hendrix into the house, or any number of bands from that era. Those records would turn up, and we'd be suddenly listening to that music, and he'd have his guitar, and he'd have all his hair, and I'm pretty sure that he brought things like Mad Comic and
Hmm.
some comics into the house. I mean, comics were easier to get hold of back in those days because where we were then was the era I'm talking about was very early 70s, and my parents were running a hardware store in Derby in Mackworth, and only a couple of doors up at Dolphins was the news that was called that was the newsagents Dolphins, and they had the Marvel comics and the British reprints and all of
Hmm.
that. But I'm pretty sure it was my uncle Ian, whose nickname was Chick, um,
You,
that brought comics into the house.
you've got to explain that.
I have no
Was it was
idea.
it was it, was it, big, was it one of those nicknames where it's like the opposite of what he is? So he's like this huge behemoth
Here's
of a
the
guy.
thing: he and I have always resembled each other a little bit. So
Right.
yeah, I definitely when I first grew my hair and beard, back when I had hair, there was a big resemblance, and that was
Yeah.
almost certainly because I just really kind of idolized him. You know, um, yeah, and he did have cool, but he had cool friend. There was another friend of his called Black Moggy, and again, no idea why, but all I remember about him is massive black hair, and maybe he resembled a cat to some degree, and the fact that he wore denims that had beer mats, beer towels sewn onto everywhere, so the whole thing was held together with beer towels. So these were all sort of cool people, really.
Mm.
And it was folky. There was folky people too. There was Mike Sims, who is like a great friend of my parents, who's sadly no longer with us, but he was very into his folk. He was a flat cap and plaid shirt and a big beard, and
Mm.
played lots of cool music, and so there was, I don't know, it was great in that sort of sense. There was a lot of narrowboat stuff, so in not it was a mix of probably more folksy than hippie, I would say.
Mm. Mm.
So we a lot of my childhood was spent on the canals. Um, and my dad was very much a part of the canals and well known in there, and built narrowboats and did amazing things there. And then we grew up in an inland marina in Shardlow little bit later on, which again was extraordinary because the whole thing was derelict, and he did the place up. Basically, what I come from a very my parents are extremely innovative. They're very working class. They were, but they have always reached and always come up with ideas and just always tried things.
Yeah.
No matter how crazy it seemed. Um, and they so in Shardlow, my dad, they did like a 3-story in this mill, the Clock Warehouse, narrowboat exhibition, and he built most of the exhibits in there. He built the back end of a narrowboat, an old style narrowboat in wood, full size, with mannequins. They built a blacksmith yard, which was just amazing and lit up with the horses, and they were just crazy, full scale, like. And then all these little mills and narrow boats and little figures doing different jobs. And I mean, it was really amazing. I used to love going in there.
Mm.
So we had the run of this mill, um, and it was the fact that he would always turn his hand to anything. Like, one of the craziest stories, I think, with regard to my dad and the difference of those times, but also I think fundamental to sort of the kind of person I ended up being, because I don't feel like I've done anything compared to my parent.
Mm.
Um, but there was a point they had no money at all. It was the 70s. The what hardware shop had gone bankrupt. They needed a deposit for a house, and my dad just saw it. They were tearing down. Remember those old gasometers you used to see everywhere, the great big Victorian barrel things that used
Yeah,
to
yeah,
out to the King's Cross. There was a whole bunch of them. They made flats in the middle of them now,
yeah.
so building. But there used to be these big gasometers everywhere, made out of steel, 200 years old, and they were tearing them all down. And he saw one, and his immediate thought is like, I could make a narrowboat out of that, which of course, right? So he goes and asks if he can have some of the steel and say how much you want. And he literally picks up a chalky bit of rock from the ground and
Yeah.
draws on the side of it. And they cut it all out and they got it delivered. And his mate Garvin had a big old shed and they put it in there. And he builds a narrowboat. And then he finds an engine and he puts that in. And then he gets the wood and he fits all the wood and then he paints it all. But he's done it from start to finish himself. It's not like he's had a team of people. And then he sells that, and that's the deposit for the house.
Mm.
It's that thinking, um, and that not it's not a. It's just this sort of course I can do that if I
Mm.
put my mind to it. And it's not even arrogance. He's not an arrogant person. It's just like, well, if I do this and I do that and I do that, it's just a logical steps.
Mm.
So I think I was very lucky to come into a family which was a family of like, if that's what you want to do, just do it,
Yeah.
and you can do it. Um, so so from that point of view, yeah, not precisely hippies, but creative people.
Yeah. Well, tell me about the Gifted Children's Society, because this is the thing. 'Cause very working class, very working class background.
Yeah, yeah,
And then I guess it's kind of what certain structures within education are designed to do, which is to identify gifted children, those who have particularly talent. But this was kind of like a proper turning point, wasn't it?
yeah. I mean, I have very mixed feelings about the gifted child thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't think it helps any kid
Mm,
ultimately. I mean, I think it helped. There's certain aspects it definitely did. Um, I hate to say that because leaning slightly left as I do, um, I feel like there should be equal opportunity, certainly in education for
yeah.
everybody,
Mm,
and I feel the weight of my privilege very very pointedly, but I'm also very grateful for it.
mm,
Uh, I mean, at the age that I was, which is 9, 10 years old, when I was taken to it on the advice of teachers and everything, because my parents were like, "What the hell do we do with this kid?" Because I just drew all the time. Um, it just turned out that there happened to be a gifted child society fairly nearby where we lived. They found the address. They took me to it. I was sort of taken off to a back room to demonstrate boring, you know, because of course they have to second check everything. That
mm,
it's like your
mm,
parents haven't done it for me, and that happened numerous. That then happened when I got this scholarship to the school. Um, and I'm just as a kid, I'm just going through the motions. I'm not old enough, wise enough, or coherent enough to even have any sense of what's really going on, except you know, someone's interested in me drawing stuff. Uh, so we went along with that. The chap who had become the head of it had been a former headmaster of a prep school down in Eastbourne called St Andrews, and he recognised that that school had had scholarships for Latin and sport and maths and
mm,
science and everything, but had never had a scholarship for art. Interestingly, and again, I've never fully verified it. This has been told to me, so it's become part of my narrative. Um, it seems mad if it's true, but this what I heard was that they literally in all of these private schools didn't have scholarships for artists.
mm.
They had them for musicians, but not for artists. And again, I mean, art was in the 70s still kind of like not something people were generally encouraged to do.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, it seems as though that one opened the doors and then kicked off a bunch of them after that across the sort of private sector.
Mm,
Um, and again, it's interesting because while I do have slightly socialist leaning views, I'm very much sort of liberal creative, as you'd imagine, most of us are. Um, the I also was aware that my parents had taken me to they when their business fell onto hard times, as many businesses do,
yeah.
especially there's always the ups and downs of the economic situations across the country. They had to move to another part of Derbyshire, and they took me to the school there and said, "Look, we were going to send him away. What do you think? Could you do anything with this kid?" And that school was just like, well, they were just like not interested in doing anything to
Mm,
elevate anybody above any. I mean, basically, fair enough. It's like, well, why should he get preferential treatment?
yeah.
And sort of fair enough. Why should anybody? Um, but again, it's very tricky. Maybe it's something I should look into. Um, and maybe things are changing a little bit towards artists now. That's certainly my experience later on, which I guess we'll come to
Mm,
with the doctorate and everything, and the Derby University suggests that there is a changing of attitudes.
mm,
But in my youth, there wasn't much about art, and we were still in a period where families wanted you to get jobs that were more about practical things like
mm,
practical work, and I was just blessed to have parents that were dreamers
mm,
and parents that were going to get behind me no matter what I wanted to do. And my dad was could have easily been an artist himself. So, and he missed out on that chance when he was younger. And he missed out, again, this is another thing. He missed out on an opportunity to go to an art school himself that used to exist in Derby, the Joseph Wright School of Art, because his family really had no concept of what that might mean.
Yeah.
And he was dyslexic, struggled with reading and processing in traditionally standard ways, which is a big part of my whole family, really. So he missed out on that, and I think his feeling was like, well, if I can give Liam what I couldn't have, then that could be a good thing. Yeah, it's a funny one. I mean, there's no doubt that privilege has played some part, not as much a part as perhaps it might have done if I'd have chosen to use that more. But certainly with Madefire, the co-founder Ben was from that school. If I had never met him and he hadn't been a founder of moving brands in London and he hadn't got the contacts he'd had, if there wasn't a slight element of an old school network, perhaps that never would have happened. I mean, Chris and I had already got it going under the Mam Tour banner, and we're doing some things, but I don't think it would have ever led to getting funded in the US and that aspect of it happening. It would have been much more sort of localized and UK based. So, there's something to be said for it. Whether you can't spend your life feeling guilty about your good fortune. Ultimately, you're still taking the chances. You're still reaching. You're still taking the opportunities that present themselves, no matter where they come from.
Because I find it really interesting because there's two aspects here. Number one, you're a working class kid on a scholarship, on a brand new scholarship at a prep school.
Very Harry Potter.
In East. I think you said it was like going to Hogwarts. And on top of that, you're doing this scholarship, and I guess the assumption with things like that, as many people have found when going to art school, like established art schools, is that comics, which are themselves certainly were up until the latter part of the 20th century, a working class medium.
In
terms of its consumption, and also in terms of the people who worked in them. So you're a scholarship boy, but comics is the thing that seems to be calling to you. What did art and what did comics mean to you? Were they in opposition, or were they fused in your mind at the time?
Oh, definitely. I mean, again, it's interesting because when I got to that school, comics were banned. But my parents basically said, no, he wants to do comics. That's his dream. He needs to have comics. So that changed the rules. I was suddenly allowed to have comics. And then that was just stupid that I was the only kid allowed comics. So that didn't last very long before then, of course, people could have comics. And that whole notion that you stick words and pictures together is somehow reductive is just a bonkers concept anyway, I think I really benefited from. I was always a curious person. I self-educated anyway. So even when I was, I would read encyclopedias about New English Library books about evolution or about anthropology in different nations and different cultures. Books on animals, I voraciously sort of absorbed information. Mythology was a big one. I love books about mythology. So I think the sort of classical education that you get at a private school actually ticked some of those boxes that you wouldn't necessarily get in a working class background. And again, you see this again and again. There's plenty of people who are from working class backgrounds find interest in these things, become, very versed in that material. Um, but I think the fact that I was allowed to sort of study classical civilizations for the last 5 years up to A level and actually get exams in that, properly study it, sort of took it to a perhaps a deeper level than it might have otherwise.
Yeah.
Because then it meant that I wasn't just doing it in my own time. I was also doing it as a lesson.
Because
And
I do see, particularly in your latter career, as and we'll move on to this at some point with things like Starhenge and your Exo Man of War and your Wonder Woman. There is a thread of classicism in there, of kind of classical architecture. There's I would assume that these are the roots of that education that
oh, I'm sure.
it's not, you're not just being taught comics, you're not just
Yeah.
learning comics, but actually you're getting a prep school art education, which then filters out in unusual ways.
There was an element of Bohemia,
Mm.
especially to some of the Oxbridge set that were in the year or two above me for some reason.
Yeah.
I got on much better with the year above me. And there was a bunch there that were definitely into their Bohemia. And it was through people like them, we developed a real fag smoking coffee culture, where we'd literally spend afternoons ponsily talking about, any, just history and music and philosophy,
Yeah.
cod philosophy, new age ideas. That I think I learned more about subculture because for some reason, a lot of those kids would have exposure to things like Fat Freddy's Cat, or for some, I guess, because they come from all over the world. So so there was American kids and there was wealthy kids that had been to lots of different places. So they would bring music in from California or music in from Europe or Germany or wherever, Australia and the Middle East and everything really, and it was a real melting pot of sort of sensibilities and some brilliant guitarists. I don't know. I'd never really come across groups like Talking Heads before I got to that school, or the Factory and
Yeah.
everything that was going on in New York and the art scene. There was some people that really knew about that stuff, and I was like, "What is this Bohemians world?" And it was really sort of fascinating to me, the sort of extremes of what was happening in photography at that time and art and everything. And whilst I had a real problem with fine art, the very typical comic view of like,
Yeah.
because we are essentially, I think, classicists in our hearts. A lot of us, we've ended up doing what we do because we draw figures well and we draw architecture well and we can draw. It's not as simple as like we just like superheroes and spandex and people beating up on each other.
Yeah.
Half of it is that at the time we started, there wasn't much opening for people who had the kind of skill sets that comic people had. And also, thinking back to that time, anything like science fiction, fantasy, comics, things in those mediums and genres were sort of all a bit frowned on. Oddly, they were outsider, they were lowbrow outsider fields, which made no sense to me at all. And so I was intrigued by the fine art world, but I was trying to find a place where the two met. Yeah, and the obvious person who's done that is Dave McKean, who's found this beautiful marriage of the fine art world and the comic world, and that's why his stuff really sort of speaks to me. And Bill Sienkiewicz, of course, in a similar sort of way. But I think Dave's leaned even further into the fine art which is fascinating, and the fact that these two worlds can sort of coexist a little bit more. But at the time, they really didn't. And I had bonkersly had an opportunity to go to Oxford University and do fine art at Ruskin College.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I turned that down to go and work with Don Lawrence and do comics instead, which was to some people madness. I remember one lovely woman in particular saying, "But you could be the next whoever, Henry Moore." It is Henry Moore, isn't it, the sculptor?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Why would you want to go and do comics? And I'm like, well, I like Henry Moore's sculptures, but
Yeah.
he said, yeah, that's not singing to me. Like, I want to do realistic stuff.
I mean that's fascinating because out of all the artists you could have gone and done an apprenticeship from that period, out of all of them, Don existed in that synthesis, that space of synthesis between
Yeah.
classical art, fine art, and comic books. I mean, if anyone watching or listening to this hasn't read the Rise and Fall of the Trigan Empire, immediately go and buy the collected editions from Rebellion,
Yeah.
available on our web shop, because they're just
Oh,
stunning. Even when the story doesn't necessarily make any sense, the, the artwork is absolutely stunning. I mean, tell me a little bit about your first encounter with Don, because
well,
I'm interested in the kind of interaction between you two.
I found his stuff in when I was at school here in Derby,
Mm,
uh, up in Elstree. There's a little old 70s concrete shopping centre which still exists called Park Farm.
mm,
And when we finished school, my mum would sometimes drop us into the library while she just went and grabbed some shopping. And when I was in that library, and we're talking about 8, 9 years old, I discovered the Look and Learn magazines. I had a
yeah.
big stack of them. And in the middle of them was, I can't remember anything else about Look and Learn, by the way. The only thing I remember is it's called Look and Learn, and in it was the Trigan Empire.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, then I became, looking back now, it's like the first time I had this sense of organizing or sort of collecting in a way, even though they weren't mine,
Yeah.
finding what that story was, excavating it. And so I'd go through all of them and try and find them and try and put them in some sort of order and then look at them and make it. And it just, I knew what I was looking at was a next step up. I loved comics, but at that time I was reading a right mix of comics. So I was reading Buster, and the was Crazy magazine was very
Yeah.
popular at school, and 2000 AD had just come out.
Mm.
Blew everyone's mind. The friends who I had that were into that was like a big talking point for some time. Star Wars was out, so I collected the Star Wars comic.
Mm.
But mostly I was collecting Star Wars comics because I loved the backup stories. There's amazing stuff in the back. And then this Trigan Empire stuff, which was next level.
Mm.
I didn't know Don's name. At that age, you're not particularly aware of the names of the creators. But I knew his stuff, and I knew that sometimes the Trigan Empire stories weren't done by that guy.
Yeah.
That was the guy I liked.
Mm-hmm.
With no offense to the other artist who contributed to that story, but Don was my guy, and that's the stuff that I really fixated on. And then when we moved to Shardlow, Vulcan came out, which was beautiful paper, a lovely print, and it was there again, and like managed to get a few copies of that before it folded. But I would just pencil sketch, pictures of Trico and Jano, and so this stuff had really sang to me. And then when I was down in Eastbourne at the private school, it was after St Andrews that I got another scholarship to Eastbourne College, which is St Andrews kind of feeds Eastbourne College. So we did 2 years there, prep school, and then when I was 13, went to Eastbourne College. and I discovered the can't remember who put it out, but someone did a sort of slim volume floppy version of the first issue of Storm, the
Mm.
Deep World, which was the book he did for the Dutch publisher, Voort Vervolkt, Essen, if I'm remembering right. And again, it was just like, oh, Don's done something else. This is amazing. Terrible read, I thought. But it was one of those stories where it's like I remember seeing the panels. It would be so Storm grasps gassed by his left hand, and then the picture is of Storm grasping gassed by his left hand. Show and tell.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but beautifully drawn.
Yeah.
And so that again, just sang to me because the art was astonishing. And it was when I was 17, family friends from down there. So I've got to tell the bigger story. I've grown up in a non-religious background, but when I was in the school system, it's a very conservative school system, everyone was some form of religion. And I started doing confirmation classes, which was a way to get out of doing the homework.
Yeah.
And on a Monday, so basically we go and sit and drink tea and talk philosophy about religion.
Yeah.
With that, which I was all very interested in. And suddenly it's like, all right, you're going to get confirmed then. It's like, hang on, this has only been one term. We just talked about stuff. Well, I don't know why I'm qualified, but if that's how it's going, okay. And that meant I had to get confirmed, but I'd never been christened.
Mm.
So suddenly I was going to get christened, and it's like I needed a godfather. Andrew Price had been my art teacher at St Andrews, and he was a lovely bloke. He'd become friends with my parents because they had a shared love of narrowboats, shared love of art, shared love of all things star and astronomy wires and all of that kind of thing. So he became sort of very close to the family, and I would stay with them at the weekends. Just really got to know them very well. So he became my godfather, and he, through a mutual friend of his, he heard that this artist in Jevington, little village outside of Eastbourne, was looking for an assistant.
Mm.
I didn't know at that time, or hadn't put two and two together, that was Don, until I was given a script, and they managed to smuggle a script out. They said, just draw one of the pages. I did it blind, not even thinking about it. All I knew is it was painted, so I did it. And Don was really interested to meet me. We went round to his studio, and he was a very affable bloke. And then we went up to his studio, which was above the garage, and he opened this drawer, and then suddenly it was like, holy crap, it's Don. It's Don Lawrence. It's Trigan Empire Don.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that drawer coming out and seeing this big double page spread of one of the Trigan Empire. It was the big one that they often use at the beginning with big drop diorama with them all coming up the hills, and a brilliant piece. And my brain was just like, this is what I have to do. What I have to do.
Yeah.
Like it was the most amazing thing. And Don said, okay, well, come and spend 3 weeks of the summer holidays with me. Let's see how it goes. This was when I was 17. So my last summer holidays, I had one more year to do A levels. I did it. We also fitted in a trip to, if I'm remembering right, it's a long time ago. I'm pretty sure we also had a little flying visit to a convention in Holland, just to get me a sense of that. Although that might have been later on, but I think so. Anyway, after the 3 weeks, Don was like, great. He was looking for an assistant. He was looking for somebody to teach, to train to become another Don Lawrence.
Mm.
And he thought I had the skills to do that. So yeah, that was really it. And at that point, it's like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I sort of relaxed really. I was like, I've got the job. I've got the dream job.
Yeah.
Just hit the goal. Just hit the mother load. So I didn't really care about university or anything after that. And just yeah, did my A levels and went straight to work with Don, which
Mm.
in itself was a baptism of fire.
Well, I was going to ask what your experience of this was because Chris Weston
Yeah.
was an apprentice after you with Don, and he's described him as something of a hard taskmaster, and I think you have as well. Um, I guess he was looking to push you to achieve your potential.
It could be hard, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think he was so bloody good,
Mm.
and he had such a work ethic. And Chris at that time had a much better work ethic than me. Chris, like Don used to say, um, and I think Chris would probably agree. Don used to say, you know, that he viewed me, he saw that I had more natural talent than Chris at that age. And
Mm.
again, I'm saying specifically at that age, because it ultimately means nothing. There are people I plateaued at that age, and Chris just kept getting better for the next, forever. um, Chris is now one of the absolute best artists on the bloody planet, as far as I'm concerned. But at that age, Don saw that I had something a little bit closer to his polish and finish, and my skill, different to Chris's, was that I was very good at copying.
Right.
So I was, and I still have got that. I've kind of made a virtue out of it now, but it took a long time to figure out how to do that. I could ape pretty much anyone's style
Mm.
quite easily and do direct copies. Um, but I didn't have anything like Chris's like natural ability to set up scenes, and he was always really good at sort of adding gravity to things like vehicles, and
Yeah.
I'm just so good at that kind of stuff. But he also just worked his ass off. Chris did. And I wonder. It's quite interesting. Chris had a military. His dad was from a military background. Don had spent time in the military. Um, he saw me as a bit of a. I think in some ways I'd coasted on off the back of my talent for a while.
Right.
Um, I hated school, and so I sort of opted out a little bit, and would that became my default for a long time, was to find ways to not do as much. you know, uh, so which is interesting all by itself, really,
Mm.
because I think that becomes a mindset without you even realizing it, and there's a reason why you do that, and it's largely because you're not happy. No. But it's also not healthy, because that can impact on even the stuff that you do love. So I had to. It's taken me a long time to really fully retrain myself into a space where I'm actually as like committed and hardworking as I am
Mm.
now, almost to a fault. Chris was like that straight out of the gates. He's just like works his ass off, or arse off. That's the American in me speaking. um, so yeah, Don. I feel like Chris had a harder time than me.
Mm.
I I think Don was harder on Chris. He could be really, sometimes he could be very upsetting. I remember what I basically what I was doing for the almost year I was there was I would put his page here and I put my page here, and I would copy it as close as I possibly could to the original, so you couldn't tell the difference. Um, and which is a hell of a good way to learn. But I would put tiny like "Where's Wally" differences in there. So in one, I put a little screen, and there was a bank of screens that Marduk was looking at, the main villain from Storm, and I put one of them. I put myself in with a little piece of paper going, "Hi, Mom." It's like a juvenile.
Yeah.
Um, and in another, literally all I did, there's a character that looked like my dad,
Mm.
except he had black hair, and I just left him bald. And Don's, he was about this big, this tiny character. He says, "Where's his hair?" I said, "Well, I look like my dad, so I didn't get it." He says, "You're not here to please your dad." Made me really, really upset me that day. And um, he was really grumpy that day, and it happened to be my birthday.
Oh, right. Oh God.
And he sort of said, "You're not here to please my dad." And I sort of said, "It's my birthday." So sad. Dear. And he was like, "Well, well, well, well." But most of the time, and well, again, you get to know people over time. What I realized years, well, in the process of getting to know Don and getting to love Don, was he would drift in and out of. Well, he had an element of depression. He struggled a bit with depression, and it was at a time when I wouldn't have understood that.
Yeah.
You know, I remember that the same Bohemian set. Early days, we were talking about biorhythms. That was a thing. And there's like, oh, biorhythms. We all have these. What do they call them?
Arcadian rhythms.
Something Arcadian
Yeah.
rhythms.
Arcadian
And it was
rhythms.
like early days of like probably what the first acknowledgements that people would go up and down and
Yeah.
have swings and would come in and out of depressive periods. And Don, when he got grumpy, would sometimes be grumpy for weeks and weeks, and then it would come out of it, and then he'd just be delightful for weeks. Um, and when I went back and worked with him years later, at that point he was on antidepressants,
Mm.
acknowledged he was struggling with depression. I had also had acknowledged that I'd had my own battles with that. So it was much more something we could talk about and acknowledge. So when I look back at that and I think of the times it was difficult, it was when he was going through a bad time. So I don't know. I sort of spotted even then that it was a rhythm thing and that he would come in and out of a cycle. And if you got through it, just kept your head down, he'd come out. But normally he'd just be a bit quieter. But as long as you did what you were meant to do and didn't fuck up, then you were going to be all right. He sent me off into Eastbourne to do some drawing. I hated bloody life drawing, plein air drawing. It's just drawing in the mall, the little the Lion Centre or whatever it was called.
Yeah.
There was a sort of place you could sit and get a coffee and I'd take the pad and but I'd be just horribly self-conscious because people do want to see what you're doing. They will come over your shoulder, and it's like I hate that. And I would, and being 18, I would always be phoning someone up and say, "Oh, I'm in town. You want to meet up for a coffee?" And then we get chatting. And then instead of doing like 8 hours of life drawing, I'd do about half an hour. Turn up with it the next day. And so quickly scribble some out. So if I do a lot, then it'll look like I've done. And he'd just look at them and go, "These are shit. What's These are terrible. You've not taken." He knew I hadn't put the time in.
Yeah.
He knew I hadn't worked at it. And so it was kind of fair enough when he was when he wasn't happy. But it's funny. He had for a good couple of years after I finished working with him, I realized I picked up a whole bunch of mannerisms from him. If you told him something, he was really interested, he'd go, "Yeah," and his eyebrows would go up and go, "Yeah," and then he'd be drawing and he'd just go, "Boom, boom, boom, boom." You'd see, I was looking at his back. I had my drawing board, and he'd be the other end of the room, back to me with a fag, usually Peter Stuyvesant fag going on. And it just began boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom. I realized for years afterwards I've been boom, boom, boom. Keep these things up. So there's not a original bone in my body, apparently.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about the kind of legacy that he left you with, because I noted that you recently did an online course in world building, where you specifically cite him as go on this course and you'll learn about what Don Lawrence taught me kind of
Yeah,
thing. And it certainly feels like uh, your work over the last 10 sort of 15 years, you can see that influence there. Like it's right there on the page. You look at something like Trigan Empire and the sheer wealth of detail, and then you look at your Wonder Woman, your Exo Man of War, etc.,
right.
etc., and it's all there. I mean, what is that the limit of the gift that Don left you with, or were there other aspects that you recognise as something that's really stuck with you?
I think that the biggest aspects were, the first thing was how important a work ethic is. If you're
Yeah.
going to improve, the only way you're going to do it is just by really digging in and just being serious about it.
Mm.
Um, you can't just sit back and rely on your talent. It's much more than that. And anyway, for all that I had been a talented kid, the second I started working professionally for 2000 AD, solo doing my own thing, the instant I recognized how poor my work was and how far I had to go, how limited I was and how hard it was, and how brilliant the people around me were.
Mm.
It was, it was a baptism of fire. But with Don, yes, there's the work ethic, and there's the thing that I cited specifically, and I called the corridor, was around. Uh, well, the anecdote, the story is that he'd given me a script and said, okay, after doing lots and lots of copies of his pages, it's like, okay, now do one where you're painting in my style,
Yeah.
but you're going to pencil it. So I mapped it all out and I drew this. The middle panel was a long oblong panel of a corridor. So I called the lesson the corridor. And I just drew the two characters walking along it. He'd made it, he said, don't look at the page I did, so you're not corrupted by it, so you're not influenced by it.
Yeah.
But yeah, just work from the script. And the script literally said, these two characters are walking along a corridor. But he stood over the back of my shoulder and he just sort of went, he laughed and said, what's that? It's a corridor. He said, it's not a corridor. I said, what do you mean? He said, it's just an empty box. I can't tell anything about it.
Yeah.
He said, where is it? What kind of corridor? Is it just a corridor, or is it in space? Is it in a castle?
Yeah.
It's in a future building? Is it in a school? Where is it? Is it a hospital? I can't tell from that, looking at that. I need to be able to tell. And then where's it leading to? Is there any way you can signify what's in the next space in that panel? So where's it leading? Where have they come from? What's their state of mind? Are they running? All of these things, or are they? What are they? Are they stoned? Are they? Are they having a joke with each other? Are they?
Yeah.
What are they doing? All of that needs to be in that, and you haven't shown me anything.
Mm.
And that lesson, I think, profoundly stuck with me. Because it's funny how blindingly obvious it is when someone actually says it to you.
Yeah.
But it's also funny how very literal we can be as young people getting into anything, I guess. And as a young person myself getting into that, I would look at the script and say, two people walking down the corridor. That's it.
Yeah.
You're sort of looking for the sort of the details to be in a script. It's not always the job. Don at that point had a long relationship with his writer, so they knew they could completely trust him to fill in the gaps. This was not a first time script for him, so of course all of that information wasn't there. And it was more like the kind of script I'd write for myself, where it's top line stuff. You don't have to put all that detail in, but also you shouldn't really. If you're really going to do this job properly, you shouldn't have to be told this stuff. You know,
Yeah.
it should be implicit, if not explicit.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, so that's a big lesson that I learned from Don. Um, and the other thing was also about texture. So he would say that one of the big things that one of his big bugbears with a lot of comic work was he felt that it was all made of one material.
Mm.
And he found American comics were like the way things were rendered seemed like they were all made of one shiny material.
Right. Right. I get you.
um, and his stuff is beautifully textured, and you get that in the people who I really I'm inspired by are very, very good at that. That in particular, people like Glenn Fabry has always been amazing at suggesting texture, even in his black and white work. Bill Sienkiewicz is the same. A lot of people like that. Barry Smith, and all of my heroes are very good at making it clear that. Well, a good example from Don was that I'd done like a clump of plants, and he's saying, "What?" Again, he sort of said, "What's that?" So,
Mm-hmm.
foliage, and you say, "Well, how many different plants do you think are in there?" And then because they were in the countryside, and from his studio window you could see fields, and he'd say,
Yeah.
"Well, look at that little copse there. How many plants are there? Is it just one plant, or is there there's probably about 40, 50 different plants just in that tiny little hedgerow down
Yeah.
there?" Um, rocks the same, is you've got porous, you've got stuff with strata through it, you've got all sorts of different kinds of textures of rocks and stone, and that will appear in one scene. You don't make just everything uniform type of rock, a uniform type of foliage, a
Yeah.
uniform type of asphalt, metal, whatever it is. So all of those things, I think, slowly start to inform what you're doing. And I think also just as you get faster, as you get older, as you get more confident,
Mm.
and you're able to cover a little bit more ground. I've sort of bit by bit by bit, within the constraints of still trying to do a monthly book,
Mm.
included more and more more and more of those elements in the best way that I can. I mean, it's different with Don. He used to spend 2 weeks on a page, so
Wow. What
I'm
what
still
a
trying to do
luxury.
a page. I know, right? I'm still trying to do a page a day.
Because I mean you did your apprenticeship with Don, and then you kind of were in a studio with Andy Lanning and
Right?
Brian West.
Yes.
Now, that's an interesting combination at this particular point in history, in comics history, in your history,
Yeah.
and having just had that apprenticeship with Don Lawrence, because this is around the time that you come to 2000 AD.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's fascinating what you're just talking about there with the different textures, because we'll leave aside your first Future Shock for a moment, but coming on to talking about PJ maybe,
Yeah.
who at some point during the course of this podcast I will refer to as PJ Holden.
Okay.
I just it's just it's going to happen. I may as well just
Okay.
warn people. Um, but on that work with
Be PJ
PJ,
Harvey as well.
well, yeah.
That
uh,
would be yeah.
you on that early work, you can almost see that you're meticulously trying to show the different textures of the texture of his coat compared to the chrome of the bug that he uses, and the yo-yo so that it looks plastic. And for you at that moment, actually getting to work in actually in comics on your own
Yeah,
after that? Was this like a clash of realities for you, where what you'd been taught and the reality of actually working on these pages kind of came together?
it was really fascinating. Again, I had to sort of go back to Don because he really helped.
Mm,
There was a point where Don went, because Don had thought, I actually really want to be a maritime painter. And that was kind of what he wanted to do, was give up comics and do some real painting and
yeah.
paint some seascapes and paint some ships. That was something he really fancied doing. Um, but somewhere along that year with him, he kind of went, you know what, I'm actually not ready to give up Storm. I do actually love it. I
Mm,
do actually see that that it's a good thing. And he sort of appreciated it more. And again, it's funny thinking about that when he was negative about things and wanting to get out of it. I put that down to the cycles of his mood again,
mm,
depression. It's a very lonely job, and he would just be in the studio by himself until, like, obviously I come along for hours and hours on end.
yeah.
Um, and they were out in a village, so it wasn't like, you know, a bustle or anything. But he was very well loved to a lot of friends. But it came to the point where then, and I was also thinking, I don't want to just be Don Lawrence.
Mm, mm,
It's not just Don Lawrence, but I wanted to be me.
yeah.
It sort of became like there was so much happening in comics that at that time, almost in that year. In that year, you had Dark Knight came out.
Mm,
Watchmen is starting to get is on the verge of coming out.
mm,
uh, the whole industry is sort of really about to change again. Well, it's in the midst of a big shift,
mm,
and a big, really exciting shift, where it was getting a little bit more literate, a little bit more creative in terms of the way it was thinking of itself. So, people might look at Dave's Watchmen as being something quite sort of almost old school in its approach, but it really wasn't. It was groundbreaking. Because they were taking old tropes but applying them with intent, and that was different. That was fresh, and that was clever, and that was this is high art. It is. There's no other real way of putting it, because there's creative intent behind every aspect of what they were doing.
mm,
Um, and so all of that's happening. Bill Sienkiewicz is a sort of doing Lecture Assassin, and that just there's all sorts going on. I've discovered his Moon Knight stuff, and that blew my mind. And suddenly I'm like, I want to be exploring. I'm also reading Heavy Metal magazine, which I absolutely love, and love
yeah.
Richard Corbin, and Mobius is like my total god, and Don. So part of it is like, I had thought that I was going into the European market, which was going to be my dream place.
Yeah.
But then America suddenly starts looking really interesting all over again, in a way that it hadn't been to me for a very long time, really. Um, so I was feeling that youthful restlessness of like, I don't know who the hell I am. I have
Mm,
no idea. Artistically, I haven't developed a style. Um, so when Dom basically said, okay, I will help you get a portfolio together. He got me copying some Brian Bolland stuff, or doing some pages, well, direct copies, which is a great exercise, and then doing what I've done with him, which is then to transpose like that style onto something I penciled myself and
mm,
see how that looked, and then try to sort of extrapolate something out of that, which was what that first sort of PJ maybe story was really. And it's hard not to talk about that first Future Shock, because I did that when I was still at Don's,
right.
and I initially laid that out in basic panels, and it was him that said, "Well, he's the center of the web. Why don't you do it like a web?"
Yeah.
So I couldn't take credit for that. That was Don. Um, Damn it, he over my shoulder. Um, but yeah, I mean, to get the script for that two-parter, he basically got me the number, said phone him up. I was like,
Yeah.
what, just now? He's like, yeah, just phone him up. Phoned up, Richard Burton answers, says hello. Says, oh, I'm working with Don Lawrence. I'd love to show my portfolio. So, all right, fair enough. When do you want to come in? Give me a date. And I turned up at King's Reach Towers, which it was then. So I've come for my interview, and he just burst out laughing. So it's not an interview, mate. It's like, well, let's have a look at your stuff first. Feeling like an idiot. Anyway, he was very nice about the work, and they gave me that two-parter, which I did. And the Justice, I think the Justice Dread, Mr. Justice Dread, which again I found the other day in the same process of going through all that stuff when we came
Yeah.
back. My first ever, I think that was even before the two-part script, the two-part Future Shock, and I don't think it's credited. I looked on it; it doesn't say my name anywhere, which I'd never noticed before.
Mm.
So I think I was just super thrilled to be in there. It didn't matter. I was in 2000 AD, so never sort of crossed my mind that was a problem. But I think I did that, if memory serves, completely off my own back, because I just thought, oh, I've never seen Dredd with a wig on before,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
using his gun as a goval. So I think I just did it, and they just ran with it, which was great.
That was like a star scan, like a pinup,
Yeah, it
wasn't
was totally
it?
star scan. Yeah, and then it was thinking of ideas. I did another one. Dogs of Law was one.
Yeah.
Great idea, badly executed. Um, and yeah, but so yeah, I turned up and started doing these things, and then somewhere in the process of those first few jobs, I'd gone to the SSI, Society of Strip Illustrators, which later
Mm.
became the Comic Creators Guild, where they used to meet in Chelsea in the London Sketch Club. And I went with Don. Don was sort of a guest speaker, and that's where I met Andy Lanning and
Mm.
Brian West. And Brian was like the vice president of it or something. And Andy, being Andy, is this the most like fantastically animated, enthusiastic human puppy of a man. And I was showing him my work, and he's showing me all the Sleaze Brothers. And at that point, he just wanted me to do the Sleaze Brothers,
Mm.
um, which he ended up drawing himself, because he's perfectly good at drawing it himself. Uh, so he sent me stuff, and then he said, "Oh, come down to London." I finished work with Don. Uh, I need. I didn't know what I was going to do next, and he says, "Well, come to London. Let's share a studio with me and Brian." So I did. So that all ended up, and it led to a very interesting couple of years.
Well, that PJ Moby story, um, you know, I always think of him as like the anti-Chopper.
Yeah,
In that they're two sides of teenage rebellion. You either become the rebel who develops like a interesting subculture and goes off and is a graffiti artist and a surfer, a skateboarder, or whatever, or you plot murder.
yeah.
So
Or at the very least, quiet subterfuge.
yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And look at because when I was doing a bit of research for this, I was kind of looking at the design of them both. And Chopper's got that spiky hair, kind of the way that Cam Kennedy ended up drawing in with a big kind of
Yeah,
mane of hair, and that's unruly. Whereas the silhouette of PJ Maybe is much more coiffured, much more controlled.
yeah.
And I wondered if you remember anything about the process of coming up with the look of PJ Maybe.
But his parents are conformist.
Mm.
Um, and they're working for corporations, and the rest of the family is very wealthy.
Yeah.
So there's this element that he was, a privileged kid. He's trying to go under the radar. Um, and and you can see that. I suppose thinking about it, I would have been channeling aspects of my own experience of public school,
Yeah.
weirdly. So my best friend when I was there is a chap called Mark Simmons, who's again sadly no longer with us. But we used to go and stay at his place, and he was interestingly, his parents were adopted him, but his dad was a Romanet, so from a very working class background, made a fortune in Hastings on all the slot machines, and um, they basically owned all the entertainment in Hastings at the
Mm.
time. And I'd go and stay with him, and he had a very PJ maybe haircut, and he had a pool, and he had parties with very attractive young ladies of the time would come and be at these parties. And it was a kind of privileged experience, but in a way, I was like the guy out of The Great Gatsby. That I was the guy witnessing it that
Yeah.
wasn't of that world, and I think PJ didn't feel like he was of that world,
Mm.
but his girlfriend was privileged, and he. So in an odd way, there's aspects of that. I even had that haircut at some point. It was the 80s. I did have hair. Um, so yeah, there was, I was never the punky rebel,
Mm.
um, but I definitely was a quiet rebel. I didn't like confrontation of any kind. So I didn't
Yeah.
like to put myself in a situation where I was in any danger of getting yelled at by anybody if I could avoid it. But that didn't mean that I wasn't doing stuff you shouldn't be doing.
Oh, of course. Of course. Yeah.
um,
Because
so
you done PJ maybe,
hmm,
and then there's bits and bobs that you did for continue to do for 2000 AD. I kind of want to skip ahead a little bit because in relatively short order, you're working for Marvel UK
yeah,
and specifically on Death's Head 2. Now we're cutting out a chunk of time a chunk of time here, but just because I want to kind of compare and contrast because when you started work at 2000 AD, it's still in the black and white era when the majority of the prog was still in black and white. So it's still in that. I guess it was coming to the end of the first kind of golden age,
yeah.
and you were getting the second wave of people like Grant Morrison, Steve Liao, yourself, Chris Weston, who were coming in. Um, and then skip forward a few years, and you are, whether you realize it or not at the time, part of that group of artists, or working in the same milieu as that group of artists, who would go on to launch Image Comics and be
Hmm.
like the new generation. You Will Petaccio, Jim Lee, those guys. And I want to compare and contrast your experiences of both of those moments. Whether
Yeah.
you were aware of what that you were in these moments that we would look back on and go, this was a change,
Yeah.
or whether you would just head down, this is the work, I've got to keep going.
That all came about because I'd being thrown in the deep end at a young age and really not having any sense of what it's like to be a grown up or how to be sensible with money or even know, I did the classic thing of like literally nobody told me that I needed an accountant or even that I needed to pay taxes, right? So I didn't
You're an
pay.
artist.
I didn't know anything. Nobody literally know. There's this weird thing that everyone just assumes you would know this stuff, and I didn't know at all. I just thought it'd come out of my paycheck somehow magically. I didn't really fully understand what being freelance was, and I
Yeah.
think people who are in that world already know what it is. And it was only when the IRS started coming after me that that I was like, "What do you mean taxes?
Yeah.
What do you mean accountant? What do you mean keeping your accounts and all of this kind of stuff?" Actually, it ended up that I'd earned so little that they owed me money. So I was very lucky with it, but it was still scary when
Yeah,
that
yeah.
turned up. Um, I had also, it's weird when you start out. I had no. I look back at it and it looks quite confident, but I really hadn't um, got much sense of what my work was like, whether it was any good or anything like that. So I was very hard on myself and down on myself, and drinking too much, and basically not being as we talk about the work ethic
Mm.
earlier on. This the difference between me and Chris at that time. I would get very very stressed, feel my work was useless, then get down the pub as quickly as I could, um, and bury my head in that, and then wake up the next day and go, shit, I haven't done the work that I need to do. I better try and get it done. As a result, the work would suffer. As a result, it wasn't as good as it should have been. And it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Um, at which point, 2000 AD were a little bit more reluctant to give me the work that they had been giving me, quite rightly.
Mm.
And I just disappeared into a bit of a. I mean, what actually looking back was a very short amount of time. It was only 6 months to a year, where I sort of spiraled.
Mm.
But I couldn't get any work at that time. I moved up to Derby at that time, into a little place in Shiloh, a little village. Really bad move because I was only 20, 21, and not prepared, not remotely in the right kind of space to be isolated in a village, trying to draw comics on my, in this weird isolated world that we live in. When you're that age,
Yeah.
and you're single, and you're just discovering the joys of, being an adult, too much.
Yeah.
And anyway, it was just it was a testing time, and I lost that. I bought a first house. It was a disaster to even buy a house at that time.
Mm.
Um, I wasn't making the payments. I needed to sell it. I did sell it, and I came back to London, lived in with my good friend Brian West, who we were talking about earlier, and he said, "I will get you sorted, Liam." And so I'd been doing. I wasn't getting any work from 2000 AD. Fair enough. Um, and and so I was in the process of rebuilding myself, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I applied to a film course. I got a place at Bournemouth University to do film storyboarding. That looked like that was all going to happen, but I was also getting up and doing caricatures at Camden Lock like 5:30 in the morning
Right.
with Brian West. So we'd be there saying a free caricature with every £5 elastic band was our line. Or any number of lines. So we had a little spot right by the lock, and just would do caricatures um, and just casting around. And then it was John Freeman had been in touch, and he was still at Marvel UK, and we'd created a character called Rourke together, which we did one story for strip. And he was sort of pitching Paul Neary. But Paul had seen one of the drawings I'd done and sent to John. And John said, "Well, come in and meet Paul." And Paul and I just really hit it off very quickly, liked a lot of the same stuff. Um, and he introduced me immediately to it turned out that he had been the guy who'd mostly sourced all of the backup stories in Star Wars that I'd loved all those years earlier.
Yeah.
And just through talking to him, it's like no way, that's the stuff I loved, and that came up pretty much in that conversation right away. And then he was like, oh, and that was Gene Colan, and that was Grey Morrow, and that was all Alex Nino, Gods from Outer Space, all of this brilliant stuff that he'd sourced from all Warren magazines and all sorts of brilliant places. Adam Warlock, and just great stuff that was in there. And so Paul also showed me Jim Lee for the first time, which I hadn't seen Jim Lee stuff at all. I hadn't been reading mainstream American comics at all. I'd been getting the big event books, the blockbuster Watchmen, Electra Assassin, all of those things that were like leaning towards like a more adult, sophisticated audience. But there was this great pop mainstream thing that was also going through a revolution. People are very they're very harsh on it this time. People talk about it like it was a terrible time and the art was awful. It really wasn't. When that stuff was coming out, it was really exciting. They had rethought the entire approach to it. And some of the drawing, particularly Jim Lee, you couldn't knock it. It was absolutely gorgeous. It had so many qualities that I really liked. It had a little bit of John Byrne in there. There's a little bit of Neil Adams in there. It had this really gorgeous sort of almost a stylized ink approach, which Scott Williams had brought to it, that almost leaned into a kind of Barry Smith, very textured and stylistic approach to the inking, and that had really unified Jim's pencils. Because when you looked at Jim's early pencils, you could see that there was actually a bunch of different styles all fighting, and it was Scott that sort of pulled it together and made it one clear unified style. And then obviously Adams had fed into that too, and you had this beautiful mix of like some real amazing talent. And obviously there are some people there who were better than others, and obviously there were certain tropes of that era that were ridiculously over the top. But we also, when was it that suddenly the over the topness of this bombastic medium is a bad thing? I don't know. I mean, yes, certain political things you shift about. Certain, it was a very male dominated medium at that time, and yes, I'm guilty too of not dressing them, not dressing the ladies in particularly practical clothing, at the time. But and again at that time I thought, yeah, but I'm also dressing the blokes in ridiculous clothing. Everything was preposterous. Nothing really made sense. It was all about the bombast of it, the larger than life feel of it, which again sort of completely mirrored the popular culture of the time too. I was like, movies were like that. But it really sang to me. I loved that. The Shi'ar stuff and the Savage Land stuff that Jim was doing was like a real eye-opener. And then what McFarlane was doing on the Hulk was really interesting too. I loved that. I just thought he'd drawn him in this totally different way, where it's just like so bunched up and almost walking on his toes, and I don't know, it was like, okay, this is interesting. I got it straight away, and I liked it straight away. And I found, again, it's that imitation thing. I found that I could do a fairly good approximation of it really quite easily.
Yeah.
And that's what people wanted then. That's exactly what the American audience wanted. So when I did When Paul showed me the Death Head stuff and said he was trying to get something that was going to appeal much more to the American marketplace. And I sent him those initial sketches. He was just like, and you've got to do this. Can you do it? It's one of those awful things where, being a kid again, stupidly, I hadn't really worked on a comic for a while. I didn't know that I was going to have an opportunity to. Paul opened the doors wide and said, do this. And poor old Simon Furman uh, at the time, and Jeff Senior,
Yeah.
without me realizing it, I just completely took their job out from under them without, you know, which I felt very bad about. But we've made up. we long ago kissed and made up.
Yeah.
So it didn't even occur to me at the time that that's what I was doing. It doesn't when you're young, you're not thinking like that. Um, you're just glad that people are liking what you're doing, and you get very swept up in the adventure of like, oh god, I can build this from the ground up. This is great. This is great.
I mean, that's interesting in itself because um, that whole Marvel UK line that came out in the early 90s, of which Death Head 2 was a part, was so pronouncedly over the top and mad and just extreme, and but so often, and this is not me casting shade on anyone involved. It was the time, it was what comics were like in the early 90s. um you could tell very quickly which comics had kind of any meat to them
Mm.
because they lasted more than a few more than a few issues, and I mean, somewhere up there. Hang on, in a break from our normal programming. I'm going to get out of my chair. Um, let's have a look. Here we go. So, I mean, this is how much it appealed to. I mean, when did Death Head 2 start? Was it 93 or 9,
It's earlier.
92, 93?
I think I started. It was 91. It first came out, but I
Right.
started it late 1990.
Because so yeah, I was a teenager, and give you an idea of how I've still got all my overkills, uh, which for those who don't know was the repackaging of the Marvel UK comics into an anthology like 2000 AD.
There's my original Bisley, me inked by Biz cover is up on the wall
Oh,
behind me.
amazing! Which one was that?
It was
Oh,
there you go.
oh, incredible! Oh, just I'm going through them now trying to find a Liam Sharp. I can't remember when they usual. I'm seeing a lot of Carl Critchlow and Steve Sampson and Mark Harrison on these covers. You're in here somewhere. I know you are. Oh, there we go. That's yeah, that's definitely
Yeah,
a Liam Sharp.
painting.
Yeah, so Death Head 2 and the X-Men. And talking about in practical costume, there's
I know.
Tuck.
Everyone loved Tuck though. She
Yeah,
had a real fan following.
just a good one. I mean, I love this stuff because it was so mad.
Was totally mad. But it didn't, that's the thing, it didn't take itself seriously. It was
Yeah,
never meant to be. It had a little bit of that Lobo Biz thing in there, so it was somewhere between a mix of the over the top Brit approach to it, which is like firmly tongue in cheek.
there we go. That's
Yeah,
Wolverine versus Death Head 2. There we go. Yeah, sorry, you were
no, it's just that whole thing. It's like it's it's firmly got its, like Alan Grant used to write that stuff that was firmly tongue in cheek.
yeah, yeah,
The Batman Dread stuff and Lobo. Keith Giffen was always a little bit of a punk in that kind of way too.
yeah,
So in a way, it was me trying to shift more into going back to what we were talking about earlier, more into the chopper kind of punk. approach,
Yeah,
the falls out, crazy rock on a page kind of
yeah.
approach to doing a comic, as opposed to the more sort of, slightly sophisticated sitting back Doctor
Well,
Evil
you,
approach.
you kind of look at that age, you can see that when in the 80s, comics started to take itself quite seriously, quite rightly too.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
actually being treated as a medium worthy of interest. Um, but there's always to every action there is an opposite and equal reaction. So it kind of makes sense that when the 90s came along, the great age of the ridiculous action hero,
yeah.
you're going to get all this. It's interesting that you talked about the kind of physique of these characters because I mean you're not a small man yourself, and but I've seen photos of you when you were younger,
Yeah.
and you and Bisley went through a similar transformation where you were. Forgive me, but you were scrawny little so and so's, and then all of a sudden, about 10 years later, like you're huge. Was this something that kind of went hand in hand that you were like you were working out and also sort of drawing people of kind of idealized shape?
Um, I think, well, I was always kind of drawn to that sort of physicality. Even when I was
Yeah.
a kid, I loved Arnie, I loved Conan. Um, that Conan movie was like my Bible of movies,
Mm.
for a long, long time. It spoke to me because it was everything I wasn't.
Yeah.
Uh, um, I was a really shy kid, and for a long time I thought I was never going to get a girlfriend. you know, and I did go through a period of being very much bullied, and just sort of thought, well, this is my life.
Yeah.
uh, but I think I was lucky in my dad's a big bloke, so I think some of it was just happened genetically. Um, my brother's a big bloke, uh, so I think some of it was that. I never worked out as much as people thought I did.
You lucky sod. That's all I
I
can.
don't well, um, but I have done enough over the years, and basically about every 5 years, I realised that like, oh shit, I better do something a bit more than just going for a walk.
Yeah.
So I'll get obsessive about doing press ups for a chunk of time. Um, I did back in the day have a trainer on a couple of occasions, just
Yeah. Yeah.
try and motivate myself. I remember Don Lawrence, he had a dog, and he said, "You always got to get a dog," because I remember him telling me when I first worked with him, he was 53. So madly, he was 2 years younger than I am now.
Right.
And he said he and the creators of his day, which Ron Embleton and people like that, had that when they got together, they'd worked out that the average age of British cartoonists was 46 years old. So he said, "I'm on borrowed time, right?" Because they all smoked and they all drank. None of them did
Yeah.
any exercise, and so they all pegged it at 46 after these incredible sedentary lives. He said, "So you've got to get a dog.
Yeah.
You got some exercise, So I know again, it's classic Don, still over my shoulder, still like, you've got to do some exercise.
Yeah.
And I never really, I was all right at sport because I was, I might have been a lot skinnier than I am now, but I was always pretty strong. So they kept wanting to put me in the rugby team, but I hated it. And then I was in the swimming team, but I hated that as well.
Mm.
So I found ways of get anything competitive, where they would force you to lose time at the weekends in teams.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my going and smoking and talking philosophy time. Don't make me go to bloody another school 5 hours away to
Yeah.
swim for 15 seconds as fast as I can. Um, I just I wasn't into that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Uh, so I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I was drawn to it though. So that's the
Mm.
point. I loved Conan. I was a big Arnie fan. I did get Muscle and Fitness magazine every now and again because of the reference and because it was inspiring to do some sort of push-ups or whatever.
Yeah.
My wealthy mate had a gym, so I used to like that. And whenever we went to his house, but you're talking about like once every couple of 3 or 4 weeks, we
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
have a mad workout. But I yeah, it's and to be fair, I've just started again, so I am back in the gym again right now. So I don't want to like pretend that I'm not doing anything. I am. Thank God, because I do need to, like my wife keeps saying, I want you to live past, past a reasonable age at the very least, when you're leaving me on my own for decades.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm trying to take care of myself. But it was all bombast. I loved business stuff. I was, Bisley Slane was like mind-blowingly good. Going back to 2000 AD,
Mm.
I will never forget. I'd done the what I thought was the best PJ Movie work I'd ever done. I'd spent some time and I was spending like 3 days on a page. They were giant pages. There was the one with the bookshelves behind with all the stuff in the background, and
Yeah.
PJ got the, I think by that time he'd got the ugly. It was either the ugly ball to start with, and then it was the yo-yo. There was always something, or a badge.
Yeah.
There's always some ugly aspect of it, which I guess was the kind of that was his real soul, on display. And there's Liana in the pool, and there's a little nod to Mobius where they're flying in a Dumbo car and
Yeah.
Dumbo thing. And there's quite a lot of there's bits of Faber in there. There's bits of Brian Bolland in there, the way that I was drawing Dread. But I really put a ton of time into those pages, and I absolutely gave it everything I could. I tried to make the layouts complex. Even nobody's ever mentioned this, but if you look at that particular story, I think I abandoned it towards the end. But even the transitions from time frame were measured. I did a complete. It was something Brian Bolland had done in The Killing Joke, where he would, when you'd have a transition from one time to another, he mirrored aspects of that image going into the next thing.
Right.
There was something very specifically similar in the layout, and so I did that where there'd be some mirror image that would take you through. I mean, it was just there was so much thought that went into those stories that I thought, this is it. I've got to make it count. I really, this is the one where I make a difference. And then I went in. I was living in Whaley Bridge at the time in Derbyshire. We had to get a train to Manchester to the newsagent where they sold 2000 AD. To get it, which was my weekly journey into Manchester, half an hour ride on the train, well, actually an hour, I think. And going and getting the issue, couldn't wait to get it on the front cover, Simon Bisley's Horned God.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, fuck. And I open up, so it's the appearance of the Horned God.
Yeah.
They'd said, oh, you're doing it black and white, by the way, because we've got something else in colour that's coming up. I was like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
And I just looked at Simon's stuff and just simultaneously, like at one time I was just like blown away and just looking at this work and just thinking, this is the most beautiful stuff I've ever seen. And completely excited, but also absolutely destroyed. Because my stuff was in the same issue.
Yeah.
And stuff that I had labored over was going to just vanish. And no one was going to care about it. That was my perception.
Because I mean that's interesting, because you were unfairly branded as as like a Bisley clone at one point, weren't you?
Well,
With the
well, it was fair for a moment. At that time, I definitely wasn't. But that moment did affect me, and because I didn't know better.
Yeah.
Later on, after I moved back to London, like this was about a year after I'd done that work, maybe a year and a half, 2 years after, I was at UCAT, and it's really fascinating because I finally got to see actually how big PJ maybe was,
Mm.
and I hadn't known.
Right.
So I thought that work had disappeared, and that I was just old hat, and the stuff I was doing was no longer relevant. What Simon was doing was the future.
Mm.
In the same way that I later saw what Jim Lee was doing was the future. These are the mistakes you make as a young person, where you're like casting around trying to find out what your style is, not trusting your own ability, not trusting your just not trusting yourself really.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you see a style and you see an approach and you think in your youthful mind that this is the future and this is how everything's going to look and everything it needs to look like that.
Yeah.
And to some extent that was true for a while. But UCAC, I got to the Frank Plowright used to do this introduction on the stage, get everyone to walk up onto the stage and introduce themselves. Mm. I walked on and Frank goes, "I'm sorry, I have no idea who you are."
Oh.
I said, it's all right, Frank. It's Liam Sharp. I've done PJ Maybe for 2000 AD Judge Dredd. And he kind of went, Liam Sharp, who's done Judge Dredd and PJ Maybe. And I got a standing ovation. The entire audience went up and just cheered. And I was just like, my legs nearly buckled. I was like, what the fuck? What's going on? And because I just thought my stuff had, to me, I had just read it in my head that what I had done was rubbish compared to what Simon was doing. And clearly this character had landed in a big way. And I, later found out he was, for a while at least, the second and then the third and then the second favourite judge villain, dread villain of all time, which makes total sense. I mean, after Judge Death, he's just like he's like the best after Judge Death. I think still actually now,
He's as has been pointed out many times, including by me, he's one of the few to actually survive
right.
an encounter with Dread,
Yeah, and he won. He kept winning. He was a kid. He kept beating Dread. But not only that, people did like the art, and some people actually liked the more old school black and white approach, and some people that was for them. That was more their thing. But being young, I wanted to be more rock and roll. I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be left behind when I was only just starting.
Yeah.
And again, we're talking at this point. I'm only 2, 3, 4 years into my career. It's very early days. And you didn't know. You didn't have the internet. We didn't have forums. You had no sense. You only had letter pages, so you might see a letter, and you were just as likely to see a negative one as you would a positive one. So you had no real sense, and the editors were not ever going to tell you then, what their feedback was if they were getting it. Even they probably weren't even getting it. So it was. Simon's stuff had a profound effect on me. And it wasn't just because it was so good. It was like, it literally encapsulated everything I love. So it's like, oh shit, you've become the person I wanted to become. Because there's like, you look at it and you can see the Frazetta in it. You can see the Richard Corbin in it, and the way that the massive arms and the sort of slightly smaller chests and sometimes quite large heads, the cartoony elements that he'd bring into it, little bits of Brian Froud. And then you can see the Bill Sienkiewicz elements to it with the lots of flipped paint and stylizations and patterns, and it's like he's just taken all the things I love and the medium I love and the genre I love and put it all together in a perfect package. And it's like, shit.
I mean, the thing is, you say this. I mean, when did the Horn God start? 80.
It's like 89, 90 or something.
89, 90, yeah. I mean, within only a few years, you were selling like 1 million copies.
Yeah, well, that was then. That was then, and this was later. But again, you don't have any sense of that when you. And this was true when I worked on the Hulk. It was like it was rough because the pressure was enormous.
Yeah.
Um, and I did not have the strength of my own convictions with regard to the work I was doing
Mm.
because it was never good enough in my head. It was like I still don't know who I am. I could see that I can see now that it was the beginnings of the consolidation of all of those influences,
Yeah.
and we are ultimately a consolidation of all of our influences. We can't help but be that.
Mm.
Um, so it is harsh when you are, if you literally are just trying to copy and do one style,
Mm.
then fair enough. If people call you out and say, yeah, but you're just working in that style. Um, but I wasn't. I was trying to understand it. I was doing what I'd done with Don, which is like, Don had taught me, you know, he taught me to just copy straight off
Mm.
and then do a version of a page in the style off. And by doing that, you learn.
Yeah.
And I still felt then I was on a journey of discovery, Um, and I was also seeing that, like with the image stuff, that all of them were borrowing traits off each other. So what we say image style, it was the Marvel House style at the time. People forget that, it was Will Portacio, Mark Silvestri, and Jim Lee, and all of those guys were Rob Liefeld, Art Adams. They were all Marvel guys. Um, and then they became Image. But it was developed as a Marvel House style, and when we, being Marvel UK, embraced the Marvel House
Yeah.
style,
Yeah.
it was a directive story, direct from Paul. Um, and so in that sense, my view was like, hang on a second, these guys are all absorbing bits off each other.
Yeah.
What if I pull a bit of Bisley into that mix? You know, um, because the veins and the musculature and the I actually, talking about continuity, which people complain about sometimes about those comics. I loved that in ABC Warriors. Basically, just didn't care about continuity at all. It didn't matter. Hammerstein would have a gun this big on one page, and then the next panel it would be a fraction of the size and a totally different design, and the next panel would be, and the straps are changed. It just didn't matter. It's like,
Yeah.
does he look cool? Yeah, he looks fucking cool. It's like, that's then who gives a shit?
Mm.
At
Mm.
that point, it's like it looks amazing. It's telling the story. It is he drawing reality? No. Is it? It's a medium that can be anything. So let's enjoy it. I kind of really I liked that self-aware just breaking of these very old school tropes. You
Yeah.
must show feet. You must do this. You must do background, middle ground, foreground. You must do all of this. Show, don't tell, and everything. All of these are there for a reason until you know the stuff, and then unless you like come out of the. I mean, Biz just came out of nowhere, brilliant. It's immediately brilliant. Right? Who does that?
Yeah.
Um, it's just, yeah. So of course, when you see something amazing, it's going to inspire you. Don inspired me. I've incorporated bits of that. Bill Sienkiewicz has inspired me. Bits of that. There's bits of Corbin. There's bits of Neil Adams. There's Mobius. There's Wrightson. There's Frazetta. There's so many things in my work, and it gets to a point where eventually it consolidates into something which is unmistakably you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing you say to, it's difficult to know yourself, and I guess um, at this point you're still very young. You're
Well,
only in your
55,
20s.
getting there, getting up there.
Yeah. Um, and the kind of the pressure of weekly books, um, the sales expectations, seeing other people around you. This is a lot of pressure to put on somebody, but particularly if they don't necessarily feel as confident in what they're doing as they might otherwise do. I mean, what did was there a lasting impact of that? Did that have any kind of long-term effect, or did you find a way to actually deal with those different pressures at the time?
I think the thing that probably weirdly was the very good for me, that I might not have ever expected, was stepping out of the medium for the time when I was doing Madefire.
Mm.
Because I got to a point when I was drawing a lot of books that were going under the radar and nobody really cared about. And I remember around about that Madefire time, I'd go into comic shops and there'd be nothing of mine on the shelves. There'd be nothing in a collection. Yeah. I could go into Forbidden Planet or anywhere, and nothing was. I'd already been in the business for over 10 years, and I couldn't find anything I'd done. Which was depressing because all of my peers were still on the shelf.
Yeah.
I wasn't. It wasn't landing. Even things like Gears of War, biggest selling book of 2008, but a game-related book.
Yeah.
So it wasn't being bought by comic fans. It wasn't being reviewed by comic people. Testament was a really highbrow, intelligent book, but it religious people thought that it was sacrilegious, and non-religious people thought that that it was a religious book. So it was suffering from both ends.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't. I couldn't get a gig that was consistent. I couldn't get anything to land, and I wasn't enjoying it at all. I was miserable in my work. I was really having, and I still didn't feel then that I had fully consolidated who I was and what I was trying to do, or even what my long-term game was anymore. Even if there was one, it seemed like you just didn't have one. You just took whatever job came along. Gears of War was good paying, big selling, all of those things, and was actually really interesting in that it was such a strict book. Because Epic had very strong ideas about what they needed it to be. That it forced me to stay very consistent and be very, very clear with the storytelling. And to me, that was actually the first moment that I felt like, okay, I can see where I am in all of this. It looks like me. That was sort of my precursor to Wonder Woman. I didn't enjoy doing it. It was like pulling teeth. There was issues with, as is often the case with licensed material. They don't fully understand comics. So I was sending them very high resolution scans of the pages, and there would be a character in the background that I'd drawn, half an inch high, who was going to be printed at 1/4 of an inch. And they would be zooming into it and going, well, what the fuck is that? It's just, where's all the detail?
Yeah.
And I'd just be like, dude, it's going to be tiny. What the hell? And so I soon figured out, send them 72 DPI pages that they can't zoom in. And they would be very particular about the likenesses and all of this, and drawing the guns again and again. It was like those things had rivets on the rivets on the rivets. It was just like, but it was very disciplined work. I was not happy doing it. I spent a lot of time. I would sometimes during that work, I'm going to do a 15-minute window, and then I'm going to go make some music for 15 minutes. Yeah. And I'm going to come back and do another. It was just just getting through inch by inch by inch. But there was a discipline to it in terms of the clarity of the storytelling, the requirements of the story, the requirements of the editorial team, the requirements of Epic, all of that, that made it very precise and solid.
Mm.
And but I was miserable. So when Madefire happened, I basically stopped drawing for 4 years because I went into a role of management and founding, co-founding. I became an executive. I had a team of 45 people to run, and it was like whole of the world. So there was that for 4 years, and somewhere along the way, I realized that I hate this. I do not want to do this anymore. I'm not cut out to be. It's not. It's been an amazing learning experience. It's got me to America. I've done things I never thought I'd do in a million years. I've learned an awful lot about myself. I'm really, really proud of what I've done, what the team's done, and everything we pulled together. But I need to draw. And I didn't know I needed to draw until that happened, until I couldn't anymore, until it was like, stopped. And then when the Wonder Woman thing came along, it was just like, it just started flooding out of me. And I just thought, I can't drop the ball on this. That opportunity changed everything. I've just got to be consistent. To me, when I look at the Gears of War stuff, and then there's a 4-year break, and then there's Wonder Woman, I can see a sort of through line in that work that is just solid, old school, not necessarily flashy work, but good, strong, solid work. And then through that evolution over the next 7 years at DC, it was that, and then Brave and the Bold, which I got to write myself, which was Wonder Woman and Batman and all that mythology stuff that was from early on started coming back into it. And the Celtic, my love for the Celtic stuff, or those legends that I have been done in comics, but I still felt like it could be. There's so much more that could be done in an approachable way, or especially if you're going back to like the early roots of it, or where it came from and why. And then into the Green Lantern for 2 years, and then Grant is like, well, I want this to be. This could be. You can draw in lots of different styles. So let's not just make this a journey through space and time. Yeah. Let's make it through the medium of comics. Let's nod to the early days of Green Lantern, but let's nod to Neil Adams, and then by the end of it, it was a nod to Arkham Asylum. Mm-hmm. And then we just went out with something that was just ours. It was a total weird explosion of like color and brightness, and which is something that Grant had said, I just want it to be about color and noise. But so I sort of had this lovely opportunity to pointedly take what were my skills and then slowly bring them into the story where we weren't going to lose the readers along the way. We were going to take them with us. And they were going to see that there was actually an asset to being, we're talking about Watchmen earlier on, and there were very pointed reasons for doing these things. There were very pointed reasons why we took that approach with that story, which then meant that for the first time, my ability to sort of shift through different styles for specific reasons was appreciated rather than being detrimental. Because I think for a long time, people didn't know which Liam Sharp they were going to get when they hired me. And it's like my answer would have been, if I'd have been smart enough at the time, it would have been, well, you'll get the Liam Sharp that's appropriate for the script you're giving me. And maybe we should talk about it a little bit more, but I'm feeling this. I don't want it ever to be a fait accompli, but that what was great about that was then that led into the book I did with Garth, which was the Batman one, which we both sort of said wouldn't it be great to make it like a weird comedy sequel to Arkham Asylum, which it totally does. If you have the two hardbacks, I feel like there's definitely a companionship in those two things. But that's because I had been able to do the painting stuff at the end of the Green Lantern, and then that led into 3 issues of the Batman Catwoman book that I did with Tom King, and then Starhenge, which was very much taking that ball and running with it. I'm going to have to go quite soon.
Oh, right. Sorry. Then we better hurry up, hadn't we? Okay, because one of the things I did want to touch on towards the end is,
Yeah,
and I've kind of already alluded to it, the Starhenge, the Wonder Woman, the Exo Man of War stuff that you've done.
yeah,
It very much feels as if there's a confidence there, and we have kind of touched on that. You know, it's no longer what Liam Sharp are you going to get. It's more Liam Sharp has a range of styles that he can decide to work in, whether he wants to, you know, based on the job. Um, but I want to talk a little bit about the kind of beauty of imagination and how that ties into world building and because looking back at Don Lawrence, you know, yes, he had the discipline of storytelling and technique and everything, but there's a wild abandon to his imagination.
mm,
So yes, Mike Butterworth is writing these insane comics that sometimes don't make any sense, but you know, it's Don that is creating these landscapes, and I wonder what your thoughts are on the ability of imagination and confidence in imagination and how you translate the pictures in your head onto the page as an artist at this stage in your career.
I think of the people like Don, and then the other, Geiger was like H.R. Geiger and what he did for science fiction, and it, by just bringing something completely fresh to the table, whether you are able to do it or not, that's what I'm always shooting for, is to try to present it in a fresh way but an acceptable way.
Mm.
I also think I sort of came to terms with the fact that for all that, there's one bit of me that still aspires to be a Dave McKean complete fine artist approach, and then there's another bit of me that absolutely loves the mainstream.
Yeah.
So there's this weird consolidation somewhere in the middle that shifts, gets pulled by the tides, depending on the story. Like with the Spawn stuff, I've gone back to a much more traditional black and white approach. I just had a feeling that because it's 5th century and it's the start of the Dark Ages, I wanted it to have almost a little bit of a nod to some of the more classic stuff, like the Barry Windsor Smith stuff and Buscema and Michael Kaluta and a whole bunch of people from that era that inspired me. So that'll feed into it too. The book that those guys in particular, Kaluta, Barry Smith, Jeff Jones, Bernie Wrightson, that book, The Studio, is another thing that has influenced me throughout my entire career, and still influences me. It's still by my drawing board. No, it happens to be out now. I've got 2 versions, a pristine one which I found for far too cheap in a secondhand bookshop, and my dog-eared beautiful one which I just love because it's been looked at so many times. It's got paint all over it, and it still inspires me. And it's interesting too, is like what you realize it's like music. What you realize when you really start getting into comics is, and the history of comics and where these people have come from. You see that for all that they inspired you, you then see that they were likewise inspired. Like Wrightson was inspired by Franklin Booth. You've got all of these people up here. But Clement Cole, inspires Kaluta, and it's like it goes on and on and on. You start to see how Alex Raymond inspired everybody, and you
Mm.
see how Al Williamson comes out of that, and it's beautiful because no one is, with very very few exceptions, nobody really comes out of the gate perfectly formed. I don't know. I don't even think, I said earlier on that Simon kind of did, Simon Bisley, but he didn't really, because you can still see the influences. It's just that they're not the influences that everyone else was looking at the time. So
Yeah.
he had a left field set of influences, in the same way that Frank Quitely had a left field set of influences that made his stuff look unique.
Mm.
Um, all the best people were influenced by somebody. All of them. Anybody who says otherwise is fooling themselves and making their world much too hard, impossibly hard on themselves. It's all right to be.
Yeah.
We're all very tough on ourselves. Um, I still look at, I've been poring over Don's Carl the Viking stuff, which you guys put out, and it's just, that stuff is so beautiful. Like Don could paint, but his inking was amazing too. It's
Mm.
very old school, but it doesn't matter. There's bits of my stuff that actually I can really see a direct line in the black and white from his Color Viking stuff. But there's also bits of design in there that are really cutting edge and very cool, like with the Viking longboats and the designs with the sails and on the page, and the way he's laid the pages out, which is actually, I've looked at some of them and gone, whoa, didn't really fully appreciate how good that was.
Funny enough, there's one little thing that I noticed you've done a couple of times in your relatively recent work. Um, McMahon has done it as well in his Slain work, and Don did it, where the action is at the back of the panel and it's in the distance. But in the front of the panel, there is a beautiful rendering of a bird or a forest or a babbling brook or
Yeah,
something. And it's the most, and once you notice people doing it, it's really obvious what they're doing. But by placing the action at the back, it's world building in reverse.
yeah.
So the detail isn't in the background; it's in the foreground, and it's just to see a continuity like that through different artists. Um, it's
I've just done it with this, like a stupid amount of work on the rocks for no good reason, other than, well, no, there's lots of good reason actually. There's always a good reason. It completely, it ends up a plinth. It elevates the characters.
yeah,
It puts the characters in a world. I always say the environment is in the world is as much a character as any of the characters. And
yeah,
once you start realizing that, you know, uh, uh, if you watched a film and the background was entirely blank,
hmm,
and everything was middle distance, and everything was just lit flat, you'd soon be like, okay, it's not really selling me, unless it was an avant-garde kind of Samuel Beckett piece or something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that was intended to give you that very specific, like, or a dogma production that was just meant to make you think about
yeah,
actually use your imagination. But that's not generally the case with this material. I think if you're trying to sell the world, then it's important that you sell the world,
yeah,
um, and they will tell you where you set it will tell you an awful lot about the place they're in. What the environment is, what the weather is, what the local politics are, what the any number of things.
hmm,
Uh, but I mean, Frazzetti used to do it in the even in his romance stories. You he would have the characters talking, and then they'd just be chatting in the background, and there'd be a big statuette in the foreground that he's just got fascinated by. Even Neil Adams did it in the Arrow. When I was looking at that stuff, it's like, oh, he does the same as Frazetta too. There's a bit where in the foreground he's got a rhinoceros, pen and ink set. It's basically just a pen holder,
Yeah.
but it's a beautiful statue of a rhinoceros. He obviously just decided to put that in the foreground. So I put it in. I literally put the same one in Ollie's house.
Right.
Nod to Neil Adams in the Green Lantern, in the Green Arrow episode of the Green Lantern, which was all a big nod to Neil Adams. Lots of people do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, just to bring things to a conclusion. This is the 2000 AD podcast, after all.
Yeah.
I realize we did skip over a bit of 2000 AD stuff, but
Well, we can always do another.
well, exactly. But your time at 2000 AD was relatively short. We're only talking, a couple of years. Um, and I find it fascinating that was such a clear phase of your career. You come out the apprenticeship, you walk to 2000 AD, and then there's the other stuff. Do you think that time at 2000 AD primed you for what was to come? Do you think it was an essential kind of learning
Oh
experience?
God, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved that time.
Mm.
I have the best memories. Yeah, I was overwhelmed and sometimes very hard on myself, and often didn't give the best account of myself. And there's a lot at that age you don't fully understand about what your difficulties are, and you don't have any means to voice them. And I also don't think that in those days there was any opportunity to voice those struggles. I don't think that was a conversation you felt like you could have back then. I think it helps to feel that you can. If you're struggling with something, it's much better if you just come clean and say, "Look, I'm really struggling. What do you suggest? Come on, do we have any? Is there a way we can figure this out? I just, I'm drowning here, and I need a lifeline.
Yeah.
But I don't want to let you. I don't want to let you down. Because that's always, no one wants to let anyone down. You want it to be great. You don't want it to be rubbish. So it was a baptism of fire, but it was also, what an amazing. It's 2000 AD. I mean, it's 2000 AD. Iconic. I, I, I literally again. I've just moved all of it. We've had our attic boarded out, and I've still got boxes and boxes of 2000 AD because I collected it solidly for at least 15 years, at least. So I'm going. I did have issue 2. I never had issue 1, but I've gotten way back. And it was really, even when I was at boarding school, my gran would get them for me, and I'd come home and I'd just have a massive amount and just pour through them all. They're part of my life. They're part of my education. You can't even really put it into words properly how seismic and how important that magazine is and has been. And you never doing Dread is like just as exciting as doing a Batman or a Hulk or anything like that. It is. Dread's Dread, Dread's like, and in some ways cooler because it's got the very Brit-centric, self-aware, subversive element that America never quite understood. It's like Verhoeven with Starship Troopers. They think he's a hero. They don't get that he's actually sabotaging and completely subverting the heroic macho mentality, which is exactly what Dredd did. Same with Robocop. Exactly the same.
Yeah.
All of those elements made it and make it just an amazing magazine. But it's not only that. Look at the talent. I loved at the time that I was in it that they were, and I have to confess I haven't seen it for a while because again it was not something you could get easily in America. I picked up a few when I did a signing with Chris Weston a couple, 2 or 3 years ago, and it was still looking pretty bloody amazing. And I still get the collected editions of things from the people that I love. Anything by Chris, I always pick up. Or by Greg Staples, that wonderful Judge Death, and there's still amazing artists in there. I don't know if it's still the shop window that it was. Well, not shop window, is the wrong term. The shop window is a horrible term because that's not fair to 2000 AD. And I know that sometimes people have seen it as that, like it would be like you put yourself in there with the hope that you go to America, but 2000 AD is its own end game. You know, it's a place to aspire to be, and I know some people are very happy to stay there forever, and quite rightly so. I don't know if it's still as good as it was for new young people, because they would give. We were so young, you know. Steve Dillon's like 16, I was 18. You know, it's like Chris Weston was like 18.
Yeah.
Sean Phillips was 16 or something ridiculous, or 15, I think he was.
I mean, it's sickening, guys. Like I don't realize I don't think you understand the unrealistic expectations that you all set for those of us who were also teenagers.
Well, I don't think we even realised it was like, you know, yeah. I felt the expectations, put it that way. they left long scars that I'm still getting over. But also, you know, they were the most amazing times. Living in London, the get-togethers. John Higgins was always extremely welcoming at the Valiant Trooper drinks that we used to have. Dave Gibbons is just the loveliest person in the world. Steve Dillon was like everyone's big brother. I miss him so much. Garth and Grant and all of these people, they've all become friends, lifelong friends. They're special times, and they were special people, and it's extraordinary the lives that so many of them have gone on to lead and what they've brought into the world. You know, not just in comics, but elsewhere. It's just bonkers. So, you know, I feel incredibly privileged, and I definitely. I feel like you know, a son of 2000 AD. You know? the art droid is alive and well within me, you know? And it's still a thrill whenever I, you know, pick up those old copies and see the talent that I was aligned with. It's extraordinary. I love 2000 AD. I'll always love 2000 AD, and I'll always be back for a cover or a piece here and there forever. If they ever ask, and they do every now and again. I did the cover for the Zombo Al Ewing collected edition, which had our. I think, no, that's right. It had our 007 story in it as well. And it was just great to get to do Dread again. it's always lovely to do a cover for 2000 AD when the chance arises. And I very rarely, I don't know if I've ever said no, actually. It's always a time permitting thing, but I don't think I've ever said no. And why would you? How could you? Yeah.
Well, look, mate, I'm conscious of the time. Thank you for giving me so much of it.
No, it's an absolute pleasure, mate. I'm sorry I have to rush off. I promised an old mate, I'd meet him in the pub. So,
all right.
So,
perfect.
He's already waiting for me. I shall text him and tell him I'll be there shortly.
No worries. Well, yeah. Well, thank you. This has been fantastic.